Mexico asks China to stop the flow of fentanyl. China considers banning rare earth minerals to handicap the U.S. military. And China's military gets aggressive as President Tsai Ing-wen meets with the U.S. Speaker of the House in California. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by Surfshark. Whenever you go online, you should be using a VPN like Surfshark to cover your tracks and protect your identity. Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador is asking China to help stop fentanyl imports to Mexico. A lot of the chemicals used to make fentanyl, which are called precursors, are made in China, then shipped to Mexico. Drug cartels in Mexico turn them into fentanyl, then smuggle them across the border to the U.S. American lawmakers have been putting pressure on Mexico to stop the cartel's drug trade in the U.S. Last week, several senators introduced legislation that would designate Mexican drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Obrador said in his letter he was reaching out to China because of pressure from U.S. lawmakers. He claimed that the U.S. was threatening to send armed troops to invade Mexican territory if Mexico didn't take action. The Senate legislation I mentioned earlier doesn't suggest anything like that. But Donald Trump, who is again running for president, has talked a lot about getting tough on Mexican drug cartels. In 2017, he offered to help Mexico fight the cartels with the U.S. military. Trump also asked China to help crack down on fentanyl when he was in office. China said, "Sure, we'll help you," and then did nothing. Probably because the Chinese Communist Party controls the triads that are behind the fentanyl exports and controls the Chinese banks that help Mexican cartels launder their drug money. So good luck, Obrador. I hope your strongly worded letter makes a difference. Speaking of fool's errands, French President Emmanuel Macron is in China this week, hoping to get the Chinese Communist Party's help on Ukraine. He said his goal was to relaunch a strategic and global partnership and engage China in a shared responsibility for peace and international stability. It's like trying to convince the raccoons in your backyard that they have a shared responsibility for not wrecking your trash cans. Never going to happen. French officials said earlier that Macron planned to urge Xi to use Beijing's influence with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but didn't expect a big shift in the Chinese position. Well, at least he's managing expectations. After all, Xi did just come back from visiting his best buddy Vlad, and he's apparently too busy to call Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And after the break, not every official in Europe is a fan of the CCP. Welcome back. President Macron wasn't the only European official to visit China this week. He's joined there by EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. But unlike Macron, she isn't so starry-eyed about the Chinese Communist Party these days. In a speech recently, she called for a de-risking in the relationship with China. This means taking the risks out of the relationship while still engaging where possible. Where she gave the speech was just as important, though. She was hosted by the Mercator Institute for China Studies. China had sanctioned the Mercator Institute in 2021 as part of its broader sanctions on the EU. It was in retaliation for the EU sanctioning Chinese officials involved in human rights abuses in Xinjiang. In her speech, von der Leyen said she stood in solidarity with the Institute, as well as other academics and institutions that were sanctioned by China. Is the speech calling for de-risking enough? No. But it's a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, India is pushing back against China, specifically China's attempts to rename territory that India considers its own. China said it had renamed 11 places in Arunachal Pradesh, which sits on the border between India and China. Both India and China keep a military presence there. As recently as December, they clashed over what India said was Chinese soldiers encroaching into Indian territory. Fortunately for India, the U.S. military shared its intel on Chinese troop movements, and China ended up retreating. China renaming this area isn't actually new. China has been renaming parts of Arunachal Pradesh since 2017. Beijing first sought to rename 6 districts in Arunachal Pradesh in 2017 in a move that was seen as retaliation for a visit by the Dalai Lama. Oh yeah, that'll show him. Speaking of China's military, China sent a carrier group near Taiwan's coast during President Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy this week. Tsai and McCarthy met at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California on Wednesday, along with a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers. Also on Wednesday, Taiwan said Chinese military planes entered its air defense identification zone. Again. The Chinese Communist Party claims Taiwan belongs to it, but it doesn't. Taiwan has never been part of China since the Chinese Communist Party came to power. China has vowed to retaliate for Tsai's meeting with McCarthy, but as of this recording, the CCP hasn't done anything new. It's just more of what they've already done before. Taiwan's defense ministry said 3 Chinese ships passed through the Bashi Channel and then into waters to Taiwan's southeast. It counted 14 Chinese warplanes in its air defense identification zone. Meanwhile, Tsai and McCarthy's meeting showed the U.S. and Taiwan presenting a united front despite the CCP's threats, which is exactly what the U.S. and Taiwan should be doing to stop the CCP from invading. And after the break, a China critic gets ousted from government. Welcome back. China is weighing an export ban on rare earth magnet technology. Rare earth elements are used in a lot of modern-day tech, and China controls a huge chunk of the rare earths market. The revisions to China's export restriction list would either ban or restrict exports of technology to process and refine rare earth elements. Some see this as retaliation for the U.S. restricting microchip exports to China, and to hobble the U.S. defense industry. In 2021, Chinese industry executives said government officials had asked them how badly companies in the U.S. and Europe, including defense contractors, would be affected if China restricted rare earth exports during a bilateral dispute. A Chinese government advisor told the Financial Times that the government specifically wanted to know if the export ban would make it hard for the U.S. to make F-35 fighter jets. U.S. microchip restrictions were meant partly to handicap China's military sector. It's not a stretch to think China might be doing the same here. Nikkei Asia reports the Chinese government is revising its laws on rare earth exports, and the changes are expected to go into force this year. And speaking of handicapping an opponent, a noted China critic in the Solomon Islands was removed from government this week. Daniel Sweidani was the head of Malaita province, the most populated province in the Solomon Islands. He rejected the Solomon Islands' switch from recognizing Taiwan to recognizing China. And he frequently butted heads with the corrupt prime minister over China, especially after the prime minister signed a secret security deal with China last April. Sweidani survived 2 votes of no confidence in the Malaita Regional Assembly, but lost a 3rd vote and was forced out. That removed him as the premier of Malaita Province, but on Wednesday, he was also removed as a member of the Malaita Provincial Assembly. A local newspaper, which shares the perspective of the Solomon Islands' corrupt prime minister, says reasons for the disqualification included Sweidani's ongoing failure to recognize the One China policy, which is a key policy of the national government. Sweidani blames Prime Minister Sogavare and Chinese money for bribing lawmakers to vote against him. If so, this wouldn't be the first time Sogavare has used Chinese funds to buy influence on the island. Sweidani was planning to visit the United States this month, but then, in a suspicious and unexpected twist, the U.S. State Department denied his visa. But after pressure from a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers who see him as a symbol of resistance to China's influence in the Solomon Islands, the State Department backtracked and granted the visa after all. Nothing to see here, folks. Now, this episode is sponsored by Surfshark. When you go online, everything you do is being tracked and logged by the websites you visit and your internet service provider, in many cases by your government. That's why no matter where you live or what you do online, you should always be keeping your internet activity private with a VPN. And now, Surfshark has servers you can connect to in over 100 countries. That's more than any other VPN. So that makes your connection faster and more reliable. Plus, Surfshark has top-of-the-line encryption and a no-logs policy, meaning they don't collect your browsing data. In fact, Surfshark was rated Editor's Choice for the best VPN for privacy and security by PC Mag. So check out Surfshark. With just one Surfshark account, you can connect as many devices as you want. Try it out now. Surfshark has a special deal that includes 83% off a 2-year plan plus 3 extra months for free. You can protect yourself for just $2.21 a month. So go to surfshark.com/uncensored and use the code uncensored to secure this deal. The link is in the description below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.